Okay, hey everybody. This lesson is about service programs, and more specifically, modules, programs, and service programs. That's actually the title of the lesson. But the end goal is we'll talk about service programs. Now, before I get onto any coding examples, I am actually going to just talk about some of the commands and how modules are used within service programs and programs, and we'll cover the basics first, and then we'll come on to actually writing some demo code. So, the first piece that we're going to look at here is create bound RPG. This is the generic one that we all use, but what it does is it creates a program based off of RPG source code. You'll find that regular programs created with create bound RPG do not use the no main keyword, but they may use the main keyword, which is optional, of course, when writing an RPG program. But the moral of the story, the way that this command actually works is what it does. It takes your source code, it passes it to create RPG mod, then passes the module to create Pugum, and then actually create your program object. So the create bound RPG actually just wraps these two commands together to create the program object. That's really what it does. So for example, from lesson one, what I could do here is I could actually create this as a module. And it won't actually work because we're using the default act group, which you will actually know is a parameter on create program. But if I took this out, it's still a program because it has an entry point, but I can say create RPG mod, and then I can use the create Pugum over the top of it. So now let's go on to the next slide. Let's look at create RPG mod. Now what it does is it creates a piece of source code, takes the source code and creates a module object out of it. So for example, in the picture here, you'll see that we have a declare procedure get customer with an export flag. And that means anything that inherits this module can use any of the exported procedures or functions from that module. Now we'll talk about that in just a moment because the pieces that use this is mostly create serve Pugum. So what create service program does, it creates an ILE service program object from a set of modules and binding source. So service programs can consist of multiple modules, although you'll find that it seems the standard practice in a lot of RPG shops is that most service programs just consist of one module. That's a very IBMI thing. That's okay. And basically, any export procedures from functions within the modules can be accessible via the service program. So, for example, we have these two images over here, where if we do a display serve Pugum, we can see the list of modules inside of the service program, and then we can actually look at a list of the procedure exports from all the modules in the service program. So here's, here we had our example module, and then we use this module inside of this service program, and then that service program now has get customer. So more of the story here is you would use a binding directory to actually be able to use these exported procedures in the service programs. Okay, so on the right over here we have a program. Okay, control opt default act group *no binding directory app bund or app bind. Okay, fairly simple. And what this means is it's going to look for this binding directory. So here's our binding directory over here. Let me put the old pointer back on. So here's our binding directory, and our binding directory just has a list of service programs. Okay, and it has two service programs in it. It has cust data and lock data. Okay, so cust data exports these three procedures. It has search cust, get cust, and cust exists. Okay, so because our program uses this binding directory and it has cust data on there, and cust data exports these three procedures, we can actually use these in our program now. Then, of course, we have lock data, as in location data. There's the service program. Here's a list of the procedures that it exports: get location, add location, set location. Okay, fairly simple. And then here's a basic program. We have a customer with a number. We just set the customer to 1337. And we say if cust exists. Now again, the way that we're using this is because our cust data copybook has a prototype to this procedure that we want to use. Cust exists, and then we're saying add location customer UK. So add location is coming from lock data. So that's actually saying, well, we're going to go into the service program and we're going to execute the code inside of add location. Okay, so binding directories are really just a list of service programs so we can use the exported functions from them. And then we're actually going to write an example of that right now. Then there's this very useful command called update servprogram. And what it allows you to do is update a module inside of a service program without having to recompile the service program entirely. The idea basically doesn't change the level ID on the service program object, which maybe is too much for this tutorial, but we are going to look at it anyway. But it means that you can change the service program procedure content without having to recompile the RPG program that uses it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're going to actually do a demo. We're going to create a service program module. We're going to create our first service program. We're going to create binding directories, and we are going to create a program to use our binding directory. So I have iEditor 2 open here, and I am going to create a new member. I'm going to call it lesson2.rpgle. Okay, fairly simple. What else will I do? First of all, **free, and of course the important one when writing service programs is you would use no main, because there's no entry point to this service program. You know, each procedure has its own entry point. And all we are going to do is we're going to create a procedure called sum. Okay, and it will be export, and it will take two variables. It's going to take, we have to, of course, declare the interface for it, sum, and it will return an int 10. That's a 5. We want to return an int 10. It's going to take two parameters, num_a, also int 10, and it will be a const, and then num_b, int 10, const, end pi. Okay, fairly simple. And all we're going to do is return num_a plus num_b. So let's try and compile that. Create CRTRPGMOD. Now, for the record, I will show you what CRTRPGMOD does. If I come over to the settings in iEditor 2 and go to compile settings, RPGLE is my type. We're in the QSys file system here, and then we have CRTRPGMOD, and this is what it does. CRTRPGMOD passes in the module name, which is just the name of the member in the library. Same with the source file. And we use option event F for the compile errors and debug view start source. That's all it does. Very simple. And then what we're going to do in a moment is create servprogram, which just creates servprogram with the service program name, and then export star rule. Okay, fairly simple. So again, I'm going to create my module, and then I'm going to create my service program. Nice. Now the next step is actually creating a binding directory to use this. That's the important thing here. So I'm just going to boot up my emulator. I should have had it open already actually, but I didn't because I'm silly. That is an awfully loud noise. So I'm going to add libel Barry, and I will, just before we move on, I'm going to do a display servprogram Barry lesson 2. So I'm just going to step along. Now this is the module list here. Lesson 2 is the module. Of course I can do a 5 here, and it will display information about the module, which is not very useful to me. But I can press enter again, and one more time, and it will show me a list of the procedure exports, and in this case we only export one, which is called sum. Fairly simple, doesn't do a lot. One simple export procedure. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and create binding directory, and I'm going to say, what am I going to call it? I'll just call it workshop. We'll put it in Barry as well. And then we can do work, binding, directory, entries, F4, and we can say workshop, and we can say Barry, that's the library it's in, and then we can add service program. So we take option 1 for add, and we'll say lesson 2, that's the name of the service program. Type is SRVPGM, star SRVPGM. It's in Barry, and for activation we'll use star emed. Now there are a few options we can use here. We can use defer as well, and we can of course F1 on these. Over here, nope, on here, blah 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 blah. SRVPGM, emed defer. Activation of the bound service program takes place immediately when the program or service program is being created from the binding directory is activated. And then defer, activation of the bound service program may be deferred until a function it exports is called. That's completely up to you. I always just use emed because it's what I've always done. So, cool. Now we can actually write a program to use the sum exported procedure. Okay, so really we should have called this let's create a new member here. Let's call it lesson 2A RPGLE. Okay, and let me just refresh the list here. Lesson 2A. So again, it's going to be star star free, CTL opt, DFT at group, star no, and of course binding directory is going to be workshop. Now workshop is in Barry, so we of course need to make sure that it is on the library list, which in this case it is not, so I'm going to add it. And I mean, we have to declare a prototype to be able to use the sum procedure, so I'm going to do that. And really all I'm going to do for this is just copy this, paste it in, get rid of some spaces, and it's not declare PI, it's declare PR. Sum returns an int chen is an ext proc. So this just says at the binding step, or I guess at the linking stage, it's it's an external procedure. So find it at compile time, so it knows how to call it. So there's our prototype, and then what we can say is we'll just declare num a, int 10, and then num b as int 10, and then we'll say num a equals 5, num b equals 10, and then we can say sum, we should say result int 10, and then we can say result equals sum num a num b, and then we'll display it plus character result return. So there's a very simple program that uses a procedure to call a exported function that exists within our binding directory here. So I can just compile this as normal. Compiled successfully. So now if I do a work obj Barry /star all, we do see I have lesson 1, lesson 2A, and then lesson 2 module. Where's the lesson 2 service program right there. So let's start debug lesson 2A, and let's set a breakpoint on our sum, and let's call it lesson 2A. So we have a num, and so all it's going to do. Actually, we could step into it technically. We can actually just do a shift F10 and step into our procedure. So we have our num A and num B. It's going to return that, and then we have our result 15. And then of course we'll display our result 15. It came up very quickly. There we go. Result 15. So it does a sum, calling a exported procedure in a different program, different service program, and brings back the result. And that really is a very simple overview of service programs. I know I did it very quickly. That's just the way I roll, I suppose. But we'll be utilizing these a lot throughout the workshop here. So yeah, that didn't go on too long. Service programs in 15 minutes, I suppose. Yeah, so see you in the next video.